She thought she would marry a sick billionaire. But on wedding night, everything changed. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom creaked open, and a young woman in a white wedding gown stepped inside. Her hands trembled as she clutched a bouquet of lilies, her mother's favorite flower. Everyone's eyes turned to her, but not with warmth. Their glances were sharp, calculating, and judgmental. To them, she was the girl who had sold herself for money. To her, this was supposed to be salvation, a way to rescue her father from crushing medical bills and keep a roof over her younger brother's head. The groom's family had whispered that the billionaire was terminally ill, a shadow of his former self. They said he could barely walk, that his heart might give out at any moment. They called her lucky, because all she had to do was smile, play the dutiful wife, and soon enough she would inherit a fortune. But luck was the last thing she felt as she walked slowly down the aisle, the weight of pity and scorn pressing against her chest. She remembered the night she had signed the contract. The papers were laid neatly on a mahogany table, surrounded by lawyers in suits. Her hands shook as she held the pen. One signature, and she would become his wife. One signature, and her family's suffering would finally ease. She had not seen his face clearly that night, only a silhouette in the shadows. A man sitting silently, breathing heavily, as though every word and every movement cost him pain. Now, on this wedding day, the seat beside her at the altar remained empty until the last moment. Then, carried by two attendants, the groom finally appeared. He was pale, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his body wrapped in a heavy coat even though it was a warm spring afternoon. He barely raised his hand when the priest asked if he would take this woman to be his lawfully wedded wife. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "I do." Her own response caught in her throat. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, to throw down the bouquet and flee. But when she glanced at the pews and saw her father's fragile frame in a wheelchair, her younger brother clutching the armrest with hope in his eyes, she forced the words out. "I do." Applause followed, but it was cold and perfunctory. There was no celebration, no joy. Only the clicking of champagne glasses, only the sound of gossiping voices already predicting how long this marriage would last. As the cameras flashed, she felt more like a prop than a bride. When the ceremony ended, they were whisked away to the mansion. The corridors were lined with paintings of ancestors, every gaze disapproving, as if even the walls themselves knew she did not belong here. The servants bowed, but their smirks betrayed what they truly thought of her. That evening, when the grand clock in the hall struck midnight, she was led to a bedroom unlike anything she had ever seen. Velvet curtains hung heavy across the windows. Golden chandeliers cast shadows across the marble floor. In the center stood a massive bed draped in silk. She sat there, waiting, heart pounding, convinced she would soon be left alone. They said he was too weak, that he might not even survive the night. But then, the door opened. Footsteps echoed slowly, firmly, confidently. She lifted her eyes, and what she saw made her blood run cold. It was him, the man she had just married. Only now, he was not hunched over or trembling. His stride was powerful, his gaze sharp, his presence commanding. The man everyone believed to be sick and dying stood tall, healthy, and very much alive. Her breath caught. The contract she had signed, the sacrifice she had made, the humiliation she had endured, it all twisted in her chest like a cruel joke. Who was this man she had married? And why had he lied to her, to his family, and to the entire world? The night that was supposed to be the quiet beginning of a loveless arrangement had just become the first page of a dangerous, unpredictable story. The silence between them stretched heavy in the bedroom. She sat frozen on the edge of the massive bed, her fingers digging into the silk sheets. This was supposed to be a simple arrangement, a cold business transaction cloaked in lace and vows. She had been told her husband was frail, that he might not even survive long enough to consummate the marriage. But now, the man who stood before her looked nothing like the sick billionaire she had imagined. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his eyes gleamed with sharp intelligence, and his voice carried strength when he finally spoke. "You look surprised," he said, every syllable deliberate, his tone calm but edged with something darker. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was too stunned, too betrayed by the sudden revelation of his health. He stepped closer, removing the heavy coat that had cloaked him during the ceremony. His movements were fluid, confident, and deliberate. "I suppose you were expecting a dying man," he continued. "That is what everyone thinks. That is what I wanted them to think." Her chest tightened. She wanted to demand answers, but fear and anger tangled in her throat. This marriage had been sold to her as a mercy, a short-term sacrifice for her family's survival. Now it felt like a trap. He did not reach for her, nor did he sit. Instead, he paced the room, hands clasped behind his back, as though lecturing in a boardroom rather than speaking to a new bride. "We will keep our arrangement. You will play the part of my wife in public. You will smile, attend dinners, pose for photographs. In return, your family's needs will be covered." That was the agreement, was it not? Her fists clenched around the bouquet she still held, the lilies now bruised and broken. "You lied," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You let me believe you were dying." He stopped pacing and turned sharply to face her. "And you agreed to marry me anyway. Was it not because you needed the money? Do not pretend you came here for love." The truth struck her like a slap. She had no defense. She had signed the contract willingly, desperate to save her father and her brother. Yet hearing it thrown back at her, spoken with such cold detachment, made her feel stripped bare. He poured himself a glass of water from the crystal decanter on the table and drank slowly, never taking his eyes off her. "This arrangement benefits us both. But make no mistake," he said, setting the glass down with a soft thud. "I do not tolerate betrayal. Break the rules, and the consequences will be yours to bear." Her breath came shallow, her heart pounding against her ribs. She realized then that the real test had only just begun. This was not the quiet sacrifice she thought she had made. This was a dangerous game, with a man who controlled every move. A man whose secrets ran deeper than she could fathom. When he finally left the room, she collapsed back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. The chandeliers above flickered, their golden light distorted by the tears welling in her eyes. She felt trapped between shame and duty, between the promise she had made to her family and the gnawing dread of what she had just stepped into. In the hallways outside, she could hear the muffled voices of staff, the echo of footsteps, the rhythm of a household that belonged entirely to him. She was a guest in his world, a pawn in his strategy. The vows she had spoken that afternoon felt hollow, yet they bound her tighter than chains. Somewhere deep inside, she whispered a promise to herself. She would endure this marriage, no matter how cold, no matter how humiliating. She would survive it for her father and for her brother. She would not allow this man, no matter how powerful, to break her spirit. What she did not yet know was that survival was only the beginning, and the truth behind his deception would lead her into storms far greater than she could imagine. The days that followed their strange wedding night unfolded like chapters from a book she had never agreed to read. Every morning, she awoke in that vast mansion, the curtains pulled open by servants before the sun had fully risen. The house was magnificent, a palace of marble floors, chandeliers, and gilded staircases, yet it felt colder than any place she had ever known. The man she now called husband moved through it like a ruler, surveying his kingdom. At breakfast, he sat at the head of a long dining table, the distance between them almost laughable. Plates of food were set before her, dishes she had never tasted before, yet she could barely eat. His eyes would flicker toward her now and then, sharp and unreadable, but conversation was scarce. It was clear that he wanted her there for appearances, not for companionship. When the press gathered outside the gates, she was ushered into his car. Together they would step out, cameras flashing, their hands linked just long enough for the photographs. He would speak politely to reporters, and she would smile, as if they were a couple in love. Then, as soon as the cameras were gone, his hand slipped from hers, and the cold silence returned. One afternoon, as she wandered the corridors, she overheard two servants whispering near the kitchen. "He looks too strong to be sick," one of them murmured. "I think the whole story is just a performance." Her stomach twisted. Even the staff seemed unsure of who he really was. She had thought the lies were hers alone to bear. But it was bigger than that. Everyone was a pawn in his elaborate masquerade. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling while her thoughts spun. Was he truly deceiving the entire world? Or was she missing something even larger? Every detail began to feel like a clue. The way he slipped into the study late at night, locking the door behind him. The phone calls spoken in hushed tones, ending abruptly when she came near. The letters delivered in sealed envelopes, burned in the fireplace before dawn. Her suspicion grew until it became unbearable. One evening, she followed him quietly down the hall, her footsteps soft against the rug. She stopped outside the study door and pressed her ear to the wood. Inside, his voice was firm, commanding. "Tell them the shipment must arrive before Friday," he said. "We cannot afford another delay. I will not tolerate failure." She stepped back quickly, her heart racing. This was not the voice of a dying man. This was the voice of power, of a man who was pulling strings far beyond the walls of his mansion. The following morning, at a charity event, she watched as he charmed investors and politicians alike. His posture was flawless, his handshake steady, his smile controlled. To the public, he was still the frail billionaire on the edge of collapse, but she had now seen too much. She knew his strength, his secrets, and his ruthlessness. As they rode home in silence, she stared at his reflection in the car window. Her chest ached with conflict. She despised his lies, yet she could not deny the strange magnetism that drew her toward him. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and calculating. But he was also the only man who had ever truly looked at her as if she were more than the poor girl with desperate eyes. That night, when they returned to the mansion, he caught her watching him. For the first time, he smiled not the practiced smile he showed the world, but something sharper, something that felt like a warning. "You are learning more than you should," he said softly, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Her heart pounded. She realized then that her place in this marriage was more precarious than she had imagined. She was no longer simply a wife in name. She had become a witness, and perhaps even a threat, to secrets powerful enough to destroy them both. And in that realization, the mansion's golden walls felt more like a prison than ever before. The storm that had been brewing in her heart finally broke one night when danger struck without warning. It was late, the mansion quiet except for the ticking of the great clock in the hall. She had just stepped into the corridor, her slippers brushing softly against the rug, when she heard a sudden crash of glass downstairs. Her body froze. Another sound followed, heavier this time, like footsteps that did not belong. Before she could move, strong hands grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shadows. It was him. His grip was firm, his voice low and urgent. "Stay quiet," he ordered. For the first time, his tone was not cold or dismissive, but protective. They crept together toward the staircase, where two masked men were forcing open the door to his private study. She gasped, but he covered her mouth gently with his hand. His eyes burned with a focus she had never seen before. Without hesitation, he moved. It happened so quickly that she barely registered it. He overpowered one intruder with a sharp, calculated move, then slammed the other against the wall with strength that no sick man should possess. Within moments, the danger was neutralized, the masked men fleeing into the night. She stood frozen, heart racing, staring at him as if he were a stranger all over again. When the house finally settled into silence, he turned to her. For a moment, his mask slipped. The man who had been cruel and distant now looked raw, alive, almost vulnerable. "You were never supposed to see this," he admitted. His chest rose and fell, his breath uneven from the fight. She could not hold back any longer. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "What are you hiding from me? From everyone?" He held her gaze, and for the first time since their marriage, the truth began to surface. "I am not dying," he said quietly. "I never was. The story of my illness was a shield. It was the only way to protect myself, and to see who would stand beside me for reasons beyond wealth and power." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She clutched the banister to steady herself. Every humiliation she had endured, every whispered insult about marrying a man on his deathbed, it had all been built on a lie. Her voice broke as she asked, "So I was just a test? A pawn in your game?" He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You were supposed to be untouched by greed. A woman who would take vows for family, not for inheritance. I needed someone like that. Someone who could not be bought. I thought perhaps it could be you. Her heart ached, torn between anger and disbelief. He had deceived her, humiliated her before the world, yet there was an honesty in his confession that pierced through her rage. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You destroyed my dignity. Do you know what they say about me? That I am nothing but a gold digger who sold herself to a dying man." His jaw tightened. "I know, and for that, I will make them pay. But you," he paused, searching her face, "you have to decide if you can bear to stay." She shook her head, unable to answer. She turned away, her heart pounding with betrayal and sorrow. She could not understand why a man with so much power, a man who could crush intruders with his bare hands, would choose to build his life on lies. That night, she lay awake in her bed, replaying the scene over and over. The crash of glass, the fierce way he had defended her, the raw truth in his voice. She had married a stranger, and now the stranger was revealing himself piece by piece. But if this was only the beginning of his secrets, what darker truths still lay ahead? The days after the break-in were filled with silence, but not the ordinary kind. This silence was heavy, strained, poisoned with unspoken words. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, avoiding his eyes whenever their paths crossed. At breakfast, she pushed food around her plate. At dinners with business partners, she wore the same polite smile, though inside her chest felt hollow. But the world outside their walls was not silent. The press had caught wind of a rumor. Newspapers splashed her face across their front pages with cruel headlines. The poor girl who married for money. The desperate bride of a dying billionaire. They wrote that she had struck a bargain to inherit a fortune, that she was waiting for him to collapse so she could claim what was his. The humiliation was unbearable. Every time she went into town, whispers followed her. Strangers pointed, shaking their heads. Even in the market, women muttered loud enough for her to hear. Shameful, selling herself like that. She bit her lip until it bled just to keep from crying in front of them. One evening, when she returned to the mansion, she found the servants gathered in the hall, eyes filled with disdain. One of them even laughed quietly and said, "She thinks she is a lady now." She ran past them, her heart breaking, tears stinging her eyes. She shut herself in her room and pressed her fists against her chest, whispering, "I cannot do this. I cannot live like this." When he came to see her that night, she refused to face him. "They think I am disgusting," she said through the door. "They believe I am nothing but a gold digger who waits for you to die. Do you know what that feels like?" He stood on the other side of the door, silent for a long moment. Then his voice came, low and firm. "It is my fault. I created the lie, and you are the one suffering for it." Her sobs grew harder. "You destroyed my name. You made me carry this shame." She pulled the wedding ring from her finger, staring at it through blurred eyes. With shaking hands, she placed it on the table beside the bed. The golden circle gleamed under the lamplight, no longer a symbol of security, but of humiliation. That night she made a decision. She gathered her things quietly, packing only what she could carry. She slipped from the mansion before dawn, leaving the ring behind on the polished wood. The contract, the wealth, the mansion, the lies. She wanted none of it anymore. She did not know where she was going, but she knew she could not stay. Every step she took away from that house was a step away from shame, from betrayal, and from the man whose secrets had broken her heart. The sun had barely risen when he discovered that she was gone. The servants whispered nervously, their eyes darting toward him as if they feared his reaction. The ring she had left behind still rested on the table in her room, gleaming coldly in the morning light. For a long while, he stood there staring at it, his jaw tight, his chest heavy, with something he did not want to name. By midday, the story had spread like wildfire. Reporters surrounded the gates of the mansion, demanding answers. "Is it true your wife has abandoned you? Was the marriage a sham from the start?" Photographs of her leaving with a suitcase appeared on tabloids, each headline more cruel than the last. For once, he did not hide behind the lie. He called for a press conference, his decision made. Standing before a sea of flashing cameras, he faced the storm head-on. The man the world believed to be fragile and near death now appeared strong, unflinching, his voice clear. "You have accused my wife of greed. You have called her a gold digger and a fraud. But the truth is that she was the only one who never asked me for money, never sought my power. I deceived her. I allowed her to suffer the scorn of the world, and for that I alone am guilty." The room fell silent. Reporters exchanged stunned looks. His words cut through the noise of rumor like a blade. For the first time, the carefully built illusion of sickness and weakness crumbled in front of everyone. He went on, "I am not dying. I never was. I chose to let the world believe a lie. I used it as a shield against enemies, and yes, as a test for those around me. But in doing so, I destroyed the honor of the woman I married. Today, I will not allow her name to be dragged any further through the mud. She deserves freedom, and she deserves respect." His declaration shook the room. By the time the conference ended, the story had already turned. Headlines no longer painted her as a schemer, but as a victim of his deception. And while the truth freed her from the weight of public shame, it came with a heavy cost. That evening, board members of his family's empire gathered in fury. "You have humiliated us," his uncle spat. "You have thrown away everything we built for the sake of a girl who has already left you." He stood firm. "If protecting her means losing my place in this family, then so be it. I will not stand by while her dignity is destroyed." The meeting ended with slammed doors and angry threats. In one night, he had severed ties with the power that had raised him. He had chosen her instead. Meanwhile, she found refuge in a small, quiet place miles away from the mansion. A modest inn with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors became her shelter. She watched the news reports in disbelief, tears streaming down her face as she saw him defend her name to the entire world. For the first time since their wedding, she heard truth in his voice. But the pain of betrayal still lingered. She pressed her hands to her chest, whispering to herself, "Why would he do this now? Why tell the truth after everything has already been broken?" In that moment, she realized the weight of what he had given up. His empire, his influence, his carefully guarded secret, he had sacrificed them all to protect her. As night fell, she sat by the window of her small rented room, staring out at the quiet street below. She could not deny the turmoil inside her. The man she had once hated for deceiving her was now the same man who had stood before the world and chosen her over everything else. And though her heart was still scarred, a small spark of warmth began to flicker within her. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was something that felt dangerously close. In the weeks that followed, life changed in ways she had never imagined. Gone were the lavish dinners, the flashing cameras, and the suffocating whispers of the mansion. He had walked away from it all, leaving behind the wealth and the empire that once defined him. For the first time, they stood on equal ground, stripped of titles and expectations. They rented a small cottage on the outskirts of a quiet town. It was nothing like the mansion with its golden chandeliers and endless corridors. The roof leaked when it rained, the stove sputtered before warming, and the floors creaked beneath their feet. Yet there was a strange comfort in the imperfection. For her, it was the first place that felt like home. Every morning, she rose early to make breakfast. At first her hands fumbled, unused to the worn utensils and tiny kitchen. But soon she found rhythm in the simple tasks, slicing bread, boiling eggs, pouring hot coffee into mismatched mugs. He would appear, hair tousled, still adjusting to a life without servants. She laughed softly the first time he burned toast, and to her surprise, he laughed too. The sound was genuine, warm, and unguarded. They spent afternoons fixing the place together. She held the ladder while he hammered loose shingles. He carried firewood while she swept the porch. Their hands grew rough, their clothes stained, but their hearts grew lighter. There was no contract dictating their roles, no performance for the world to see. Just two people learning to live, side by side. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch watching the sky turn shades of gold and crimson. She leaned against the railing, her eyes tired but soft. "I never thought I would find peace in such a place," she admitted. He looked at her, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "I never thought I would deserve it." The words lingered between them, fragile and sincere. For the first time since their wedding, she did not see a stranger or a deceiver. She saw a man stripped of power, carrying his scars openly, trying to rebuild not only his life, but also her trust. And though her heart was still cautious, she felt something bloom, something fragile, like hope, taking root where once there had been only pain. But peace never lasts forever. One crisp autumn morning, a black car appeared on the dirt road that led to their cottage. The sight of it sent a chill through her, because nothing about it belonged in their quiet, hidden life. The car stopped at the gate, and out stepped his uncle, the man who had once commanded boardrooms and empires with an iron fist. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "You have made your point," the uncle said, his voice sharp as steel. "But the company is crumbling without you. Investors are pulling out. Rivals are circling like wolves. If you do not return now, everything will be lost." Her husband's jaw tightened. He had expected this moment, but that did not make it easier. "I told you," he said firmly. "I will not go back to that life. I chose her. I chose this." The uncle's gaze shifted toward her, cold and assessing. "Do you see what you have done? He was destined to lead an empire, and now he wastes away in a shack because of you." The words cut her deeply, even though she knew they were meant to. That night, as she lay awake beside him, doubt crept into her heart. Was she holding him back? Was his sacrifice too great? She thought of the power he once held, the influence he had abandoned, and wondered if love could truly be enough to replace it. The following day, he found her sitting alone by the river behind the cottage. Her eyes were distant, her hands clenched in her lap. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Do you regret leaving it all for me?" He knelt beside her, taking her hands into his. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. "I regret the lies. I regret the pain I caused you. But walking away from them? No. That was the first choice I made for myself. Not for the company, not for appearances. For me, for us." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but the fear lingered. The world they had left behind was not done with them yet, and she knew the day would come when they would have to face it fully. And when that day came, they would both have to decide whether their fragile love was strong enough to survive the weight of the empire that threatened to pull them apart. The day of reckoning came sooner than either of them expected. The company board called an emergency meeting, and the press swarmed with speculation. Rivals had grown bold. Scandals threatened to topple what remained of his empire, and whispers filled the air that the once mighty family would soon collapse. He knew that if he did not step forward now, everything would be destroyed. She stood at the cottage door as he prepared to leave. "You do not have to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You left that world behind. You do not owe them anything." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away the tear on her cheek. "I owe them nothing," he said. "But I owe you the truth. I cannot spend the rest of my life hiding. If I am to be your husband, truly your husband, then I have to face the world without lies." That afternoon he walked into the boardroom, not as the frail billionaire the world believed him to be, but as the man he truly was. Reporters filled the hall outside, cameras flashing. He spoke with clarity, confessing every deception, every falsehood that had built his empire's illusion. And then, before the crowd of journalists, he declared, "This woman, the one you called greedy, the one you scorned, is the only person who stood by me when she had every reason to walk away. I will not allow her name to be dragged through the dirt any longer. If you want to destroy me, do it. But her dignity will remain untouched." The statement spread across the world like fire. Headlines shifted overnight. No longer was she the poor girl who married for money. She was the woman who endured humiliation for the sake of her family, the woman he had risked everything to protect. When he returned home, she was waiting by the gate of the cottage. The look in her eyes was no longer filled with fear or doubt. Instead, it was steady, clear, and unwavering. "I believed I had lost everything the day I left the mansion," she said softly. "But today, I realized we gained something more important than wealth or power. We gained the chance to live honestly." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if letting go would mean losing her forever. For the first time since their strange marriage began, there were no secrets, no lies, no contracts binding them together, only love, raw and undeniable. And as the evening sun painted the sky with shades of gold and crimson, they stood there, two souls who had walked through deception, betrayal, and sacrifice, finally finding peace in the truth and in each other. Their marriage had begun as an illusion, but it ended as something real. Something unbreakable. Something that would last,